Coming up on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Invasive trees and brush are causing problems across many of our grazing lands. Today, we're taking a look at the people, the programs, and the initiatives that are working to fight back against woody plant encroachment in the Great Plains grasslands.
And now, NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Hello and welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Kate Maher. It's well documented how valuable good grass is to cattle. But farmers and ranchers often deal with challenges that can have a negative impact on their grass, including encroachment by brush and trees. It's a big problem, especially in the Great Plains, where we're coming to you from today. Now we head to Kansas and Oklahoma to get insights on the challenges out on their lands and to see some of the strategies landowners and conservation partners are using to keep these grasslands healthy and productive.
We're trying to fight back. It's coming at us. And the program, the GPGI, and the NRCS is helping us to meet that enemy as it's coming at us.
We can move into an area, execute a brush management contract on it, clear it of trees, and we feel really good about it. And then 2-3 years later, we see all these seeds coming back. And so the seedlings absolutely are a problem because they're making seed as well. And so to address that seed bank, or the seed pressure, so to speak, is huge.
You have to expand out and look at the landscape because, especially with woody encroachment, is you can do everything perfectly inside your fence. If your neighbor isn't doing anything, you will lose. That is what it is.
These are the concerns Great Plains ranchers are facing. Woody encroachment includes a variety of invasive species, but enemy number one is the eastern red cedar that can easily overtake a grassland. These maps show how the severity of the issue has increased from 1990 to 2020.
So when you look at that satellite imagery data, when you look at those maps, and you can see year by year, when you can see this encroachment, I think that really wakes folks up. It did me, I know that. But I think that's really the eye-opener, seeing that science data and seeing how quickly the biome is shifting, seeing how quickly woody encroachment's actually moving.
Woody encroachment has become much more of a threat. Looking through pictures, my grandparents' pictures of their house, you can see the hill behind their house, not a tree on it. Now it's a small forest. So trees have definitely become more of a problem.
So for livestock production, it has huge impacts. We have some research that was done around Stillwater, Oklahoma, and central part of the state, where we had tracked kind of how much the forage production was decreased when we had specifically eastern red cedar taking over. And in those locations, you can have a stocking rate. You may need to triple the number of acres that you need to support a cow versus an area that hasn't been encroached by eastern red cedar.
Recognizing the growing threat has resulted in an effort called the Great Plains Grassland Initiative.
The Great Plains Grassland Initiative, GPGI, is named appropriately Great Plains. It's the name of a biome, of a large grassland biome, right? And it's all interconnected. We're looking at landscape level ecological management here against woody encroachment. And so, woody encroachment, seed dispersal, it doesn't care where the state line is. It doesn't care where the fence line is between one property owner to the next. Those things are abstract. Simply ecologically, those things don't matter. They're just lines on a map. And so it's important that we have consistency and work together, not only from one landowner to the next, but from one political boundary to the next, whether that's the neighboring state, neighboring county.
What the Great Plains Grassland Initiative has really allowed us to do is it's really allowed us to have actual wins on the grassland. Ourselves and many of the other producers, we cut more and more trees every year, and we feel like we have nothing to show for it. When Direct Tidwell came along and showed us a study, and the Great Plains Grasslands Initiative started, it gave us something to really get a hold of where we could actually win and make progress on our grasslands. And that's really important to us, and it keeps that fire going so that we can keep going, make progress.
So I think one of the things that
The Great Plains Grassland Initiative is it's this vision of large intact cores, and the mush rushes have really grabbed a hold of that concept and realized that, hey, this can be a win for our operation. Is they're doing a lot of management, and so what it allows in is this zone of influence now becomes much smaller and actually is just about to get eliminated, this next year. And so that's exciting, is they're taking those steps to get to that tree-free and seed-free area.
Developed as part of the Great Plains Grassland Initiative, the concept of defending the core changes the focus of the battle against woody encroachment.
We were, in many cases, tackling areas that had a lot of trees and maybe not focusing our management on the areas that we were keeping open. And so now we've really shifted what our priority is. Woody plants taking over is by far the number one resource concern for our ranchers managing rangelands in Oklahoma. And we are trying to help folks with strategies for maintaining the core. So when we talk about the core, we're talking about the open grassland areas, the areas we don't have trees already.
It's the idea of having cores and large areas of intact grassland. So you identify the core, you develop the core, you protect the core, and then at the same time you attempt to expand the core. Because as you do that, you make acres that are interior to the core much less vulnerable to woody encroachment or reinfestation with woody encroachment.
Our old science, it showed, we were trying to tackle big areas where we had heavy infestations of brush. And it was just like, we would go in there and we would eradicate the brush, but then it wasn't eradicated. And it just seemed like we were getting nowhere. Where science now tells us that if we go in there and we're hitting these areas where the density isn't as high as these other places, then we're having success. We're stopping it there instead of letting it spread into areas, and it's costing us less money, and it's an easier work for the ranchers as well when they're going out and doing these areas.
Defending the core, to me, is all about intact grassland. So not only about trees, but having healthy rangeland in our pastures, against any invasive species, against bare ground, healing feed grounds, really just looking at the health of our pastures and saying, what can be better and how can we make this better?
And defending the core within the Great Plains grasslands also means leaving no tree behind.
We talked through the idea of if we leave a tree, that effect that tree has can be pretty close to 26 acres around it. So in the past, there maybe were some not so easy wins as far as taking brush out. And we may have overlooked some things with producers to say, well, if those trees are in a fence line, we know that's going to be awful tough to try to get those out with the fence there. So we'll just make sure and get the rest. And so within this, we've kind of tied into this. Really, we don't want to leave any tree that's out there. For sure, the invasive ones that we know can spread quickly.
Now we're getting ahead of it and using different pest management strategies. Fire is super critical in the effort to keep our grasslands resilient. And so with that idea, then our efforts have really begun to shift and focus on helping the rancher, coming alongside the rancher in delivering those tools and resources they need to fight back against woody encroachment.
We're having, just better progress in getting rid of the cedar trees and just all the woody species. And with having that intact prairie, we're just expanding that wildlife habitat, the better grazing distributions for our ranchers. And it's just a win-win all around, for not just for the states, but for the prairie, the wildlife, and the ranchers.
My hope is that we start seeing these defended cores grow in size, that we can actually share the stories of the mush rushes and those individuals that stepped up and said, grasslands are going to win. And if grasslands win, then the mush rushes win, wildlife wins, pollinator wins, soil, the sequestration, carbon wins. And so there's just a lot of wins on the landscape if we can keep this prairie landscape what it is.
My recommendation is always, for any rancher that's wanting to get involved with any NRCS program, and especially GPGI, is make that local visit to the local county conservation district where our NRCS staff is and our conservation district partners are at. The best step is just to start having that conversation. And if not that, reach out to your peers that are actively engaged in the initiative or in woody encroachment suppression, if you will.
Joining me now is Dr. Dirac Twidwell, the Working Lands for Wildlife Science Advisor and an Associate Professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Dr. Twidwell, thanks for being here. The Great Plains is really the last continuous grasslands left on Earth. Why is this ecosystem so important? Why is it so important to preserve it?
Great Plains has some of the most large and intact continuous grasslands remaining on the planet, but grasslands overall on Earth are actually some of the most at risk of any major vegetation type. So in fact, it's so prominent historically, it's not just, most people think of grasslands, they think of like a landscape or something at that scale. Grasslands were such a prominent feature on Earth that they're a biome. So the Great Plains was a grassland biome, meaning it spanned from Canada all the way down into the Texas-Mexico border. And really what we're tracking is the collapse of a biome or the death of a biome. We're watching where, due to historical land use conversion, coupled with today the expansion of woody plants into that biome, we're really only down to about 16% of our biome that's escaped those two pressures. So that's what we have left, 16%. And just sinking that in, that means it's such a rare resource today that it's kind of an all hands on deck to, can we conserve some of the last remaining large and intact grasslands of North America? And that's going to be critical, because how we achieve grassland conservation will be our contribution to really global grassland conservation efforts, one of the most underappreciated and really misunderstood and taken for granted vegetation types on the planet.
There's a lot of working lands in among those grasslands. Why is it important to include those in the measures, in the grassland measurements?
Grasslands across the planet are strongly tied to private lands, and also they have a strong indigenous tie or indigenous history for a lot of them. Here in the Great Plains, we're talking in general 95 to 97% privately owned land. So it's really important when you're talking about working lands. Ranchers, for example, are the dominant landowner for grasslands. They're, of course, trying to sustain profits, have this intergenerational culture that's so important to the ranching identity. And we ask ranchers to do a lot. Not only do they make money on that land, but how we manage rangeland and ranchers on those areas, we're asking them to help with sustainability of water resources. In Nebraska, under the Sandhills Prairie, we've got the Ogallala Aquifer. And so a lot of people don't think that ranchers help manage that water resource. If it's not that, they help prevent wildfire disasters from increasing in the Great Plains by preventing the expansion of volatile woody fuels. So those are just a couple of examples of working lands is where it starts and ends with our Great Plains biome. It's dominated by ranching culture, and we're asking them to do so much other things besides just profit on their land that we benefit from elsewhere in the Great Plains states.
So talk about the strategy among all those groups, agency, landowners, and scientists like yourselves, in an overall strategy that you call defending the core. What is that, and what does it mean?
Yeah, so defending the core, it really started with discussions that I was having with Shelley Kelly with Sandhills Task Force, and where it's like, look, given the expansion and the collapse of a biome, we should really take a county and in the Sandhills and create a core area and show how easier it could be to manage encroachment. So what we used to do, based on some of our science guidance in the past, was we would wait until you get heavy infestation woody plants, remove it, but then it comes back because of the seed that's in the seed bank and seedlings and so forth. So it comes back, and you get the not so funny joke from Texas that they would say, if we sold the ranch 3 times to pay brush management. And there was just something that we missed in the science on it. We missed how this encroachment or invasion process happens through reproduction. So 95% of cedar recruitment happens within 2 football fields of a seed source. Well, we can manage football fields. So because of that, we're like, well, wait a minute, what if we had a core area that wasn't exposed to the threat everywhere? As you go south, what you notice is there's always a seed source everywhere you look. So the reason we didn't have woody encroachment everywhere is because we didn't have seed sources everywhere. And we have new data showing that that's the best predictor of encroachment is proximity to a seed source. Not rainfall, not other factors, proximity to, of course, the threat or exposure to the threat. So defend the core is really just about, we have to retrain our minds instead of reacting to the problem after we lose production, lose a number of other ecosystem services we don't want, and it's super expensive and hard to get back. Let's actually keep what we want intact and focus on that. And then we can grow that core area once you're anchored to something stable. That's really what the mantra defend the core meant. And what's cool about this is just how we should manage invasions, all invasions as we go forward. So the same kind of mentality is being used for cheatgrass out west because that's their similar impossible threat in rangelands. So it's these broader biome threats. You can't just manage it by yourself. It's beyond just an individual. You've got to really work as a community at larger scales and defend these larger scale landscapes. Because once you start losing them, no group's successfully shown how to get them back at those scales.
What resources are available through this science to help landowners determine which method is best for managing these horribly invasive woody species?
What we were able to come up with through some various collaborations with other land grant institutions is we came up with a new science guide on just how to think of this in terms of risk management. So how do you reduce your risk to encroachment? And there's a whole series of steps and guidance and things to look for so that people can start getting ahead on that issue instead of just reacting to a problem, treating a problem, and having to do that perpetually. So we call it the vulnerability guide. It's just a guide to reduce that risk and vulnerability to encroachment. And in addition, we've got online data and web-based data that we're going to come out with hopefully later this year that actually everyone can see what key metrics like production losses to woody encroachment for every county in every state where we have rangelands, early warning signals of loss, and understanding the risks of inaction long term. So they can start to see really how this trend is playing out. And the science will empower any citizen, producer, agency support person and professional to be able to take what we see in the science and apply it for their operation or their partnerships.
This has been so fascinating to learn about all this information. Dr. Twidwell, thanks for all you do. Thanks for continuing to bring the science to this problem so that we can make a plan. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the industry and their support and so forth. So I really appreciate you all coming out.
It takes a village to kill a tree, right? To learn more about assistance available to help protect and improve working grasslands, contact your local USDA service center or visit the website nrcs.usda.gov. Still to come on Cattlemen to Cattlemen, we'll gain some additional insights on the use of fire and other strategies to fight back against woody plant encroachment. Stay with us.
For commercial cow-calf producers, crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer is the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Gelbvieh and Balancer females offer maternal superiority through increased fertility, greater longevity, and more pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer cattle deliver increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and excellent carcass merit. Balancer adds the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Gelbvieh and Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Find out more at the website gelbvieh.org.
When you spot BRD in your cattle, that's your golden opportunity to target infection and its associated fever with a single dose of Resflor Gold, the industry standard dual therapy. To learn more, talk to your Merck Animal Health rep or your vet and see label at resflorgold.com. Animals intended for human consumption must not be slaughtered within 38 days of treatment. This product is not approved for use in female dairy cattle 20 months of age or older, including dry dairy cows.
Fire can be a powerful tool to help control invasive species and improve forage resources. We asked some of the ranchers and conservation experts we visited with to share their insights on fire and other strategies they use to have a positive impact on their grasslands.
We found prescribed fire is the most cost-effective way to clean up these eastern red cedars or maintain rangelands. Mechanical was quite expensive. We still utilize mechanical throughout the range just to prep our burn units, but by far prescribed fire is the most cost-effective way to do it. The biggest thing that we use to improve results on our fires is the cutting and stuffing method. That's really all it is just cutting. Something that you're doing already is cutting the trees on accessible acres and shoving them into inaccessible acres, which really improves the heat and provides a ladder fuel for those trees to carry on through those rough terrain or areas where you're not generally going to get fire without doing that process. There's other things like we manipulate fire a little bit with interior ignition. Interior ignition has been a real big role on how we burn units. It's been really big on the success of the units when it comes to mortality.
So typically the way that they prepare these units is they use wheeled equipment in the form of skid steers, and they come in and they shear all the trees that are accessible that way. They take them and they stuff them up against those steep areas on the lower side of the trees that they can't reach with the wheeled equipment. They also do that same thing up on the top. And then when they come in and actually do the prescribed fire, they have interior igniters that come in here and make sure that those areas get lit. And they use that to add that extra fuel to the fire and pull those fires together. And that's what causes these areas that normally might not get any fire on them, because there's really no fine fuel or not enough down low to do that. And so once these trees then get burned and they're in this skeleton stage like this, they'll stand here on these hillsides for 6 to 8 years, and then eventually they'll blow over, and through a couple more fire cycles, we hope that they'll be gone.
Prescribed burning is a huge part of what we do. So not only to keep woody encroachment in check, but also just the health of the range, just the health of the native grasses. We'll try and put fire back on the landscape in an interval of about 3 to 7 years. The idea is obviously to keep woody encroachment in check, also better for our native grass species.
Working on the woody encroachment issue, learning from the Great Plains Grassland Initiative has really changed the way that we look at our grasslands. We take those principles that we learned through this program, and we're starting to apply them to all invasives. So now we are not only mapping trees and measuring our progress on trees, we're mapping other invasives on our ranch. We're making sure we know where they are. We know to revisit those areas year after year, same areas, and we can monitor and we can track our progress. And that's been a huge boon for us on our ranch, and one way that's really shifted the way that we look at our landscape and how we manage it.
Joining me now is Mike Beam, who is the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. Secretary Beam, thanks for being with us. We're standing here today in the beautiful Flint Hills of Kansas. Tell our audience a little bit about the Flint Hills and why they're unique and so important.
Well, it's the last stand really of the tallgrass prairie, and there's so much history in the multi-generation families in ranching. In fact, the Kansas Livestock Association got its start right here in the Flint Hills when a group of ranchers got together and decided that they would be more effective in one voice. It's always been a real central part of the beef cattle industry and the rural communities. It's all based on the open space, the families that make a living and care for these really unique grasslands.
And you mentioned the cattle producers that are an important part of this community, but grazing then plays a big part not only in the Flint Hills, but really all across Kansas. Talk to us about the importance of grazing and the role it plays in conservation.
Well, that's the real unique part of beef cattle production is it's a very high protein, very high value agricultural product. And what a lot of us need to remember is much of that is derived from grasslands. And there's not any grasslands, at least in the United States, that are as productive in the 90 days in the summer. I mean, cattle will gain maybe as much as 3 pounds a day. It's very nutritious. It's so resilient.
Yeah, I don't think we can argue about the value of this grass looking at it here. The Great Plains Grass Initiative, I'd like to ask you about that. Talk about how in Kansas here, groups have partnered together to work within the initiative to stop the woody encroachment on grasslands such as these.
Well, I'm real excited because as I understand the impetus for this started with ranchers. I think it was a conversation that NRCS had with ranchers who maybe even initiated is if we don't take care of this woody encroachment, we're going to lose. It's so difficult and so expensive to reclaim it. And that education and awareness and buy-in, and NRCS is the perfect vehicle to help with technical service and getting funds on the ground. And I know when they first announced it, they credited the ranchers themselves saying, this is what NRCS can do to help us long-term.
So then let's talk about the role of cattle then. What can be done to help more people understand the key role that cattle play to healthy lands and conservation?
Well, that's one of the perceptions is that, cattle, and when you see the food on the plate, it's largely grain-based. Some question whether it's a wise use of resources. And I know folks in the cattle industry are always trying to find ways to provide the facts where the animals, most of their life is on grasslands, lands that have very little economic productive use other than from grazing animals. And it's a protein source that relies heavily on the forages. I mean, ranchers know that instinctively, and that's the one thing I've learned most through my career as listening to them. Yes, they'll say they're in the cattle business, but they know and they see themselves as holistic land managers, because how they treat the land, how they enhance it and take care of it will help them profitability-wise, but it also helps their supply chain part of the protein sector, and that's, in most cases, cattle.
Secretary Beam, it's always such a pleasure to see you. Thanks for coming to the show today. Most importantly, thanks for all you do to support farmers and ranchers here in Kansas and their conservation efforts. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you. It's just real exciting to do this.
Still to come, we'll head to Nebraska to get a closer look at the challenges ranchers face in preserving grasslands for both cattle and wildlife. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
From the very beginning, Ritchie has been dedicated to one thing: helping people deliver fresh, constant water to their animals. Today's Ritchie waterers rely on a valve design that remains much the same as it was in 1921. It's a simple idea: do it right, and the rest will take care of itself. We never set out to create a company that would be around for 100 years. We just wanted to create something great.
We didn't just design the 6M tractors with you in mind, we designed them with you by our side. The new 6M tractors from John Deere, reimagined by you, for you. For a limited time, get 0% APR financing on qualifying 6 Series tractors and round balers. Experience the new 6M at your local John Deere dealer.
Get jazzed as the Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA Trade Show returns to New Orleans February 1st through 3rd, 2023. Experience the oldest and largest convention for the beef cattle business. Register today by visiting convention.ncba.org.
Welcome back. Today we're focusing on the importance of Great Plains grasslands and the ways farmers and ranchers are working to protect this valuable resource from woody plant encroachment. Let's head to Nebraska to see the partnerships and the strategies in place that are making a real difference on the land.
So eastern red cedar kind of takes over, as we call it invasive, because it comes in and just builds on your grassland, reducing your amount of grazing acres, for your livestock, which really affects your bottom line when it comes to a grazing type program through your livestock.
Over time, and it kind of sneaks up on you, you can imagine, I see a few small cedars, and then eventually they become larger and they become seed producing, and those just end up creeping across the landscape.
We've got to do something. We've got to react quickly, because now it is almost beyond what we can do. We are the front line.
I believe this is becoming a war against the woody encroachment in Nebraska as more and more landowners becoming aware of the threat and that the shift in the biome. It's not just a localized problem on localized ranches. It's a biome threat. It's a biome problem. The grasslands of the Great Plains are under this threat of the woody encroachment.
The fight to defend the core of Nebraska's grasslands from the invasion of eastern red cedar trees and other woody plants is being waged across the state in a variety of ways.
Prescribed burning is a great management tool because it allows you to get some control on these areas that are super steep and that are inaccessible to any other type of control method by wheeled equipment and that kind of thing. But the other thing is probably the most cost effective in terms of cost per acre. And it does the most thorough job.
Producers are using fire because not only is it economical, they're able to spend just a few dollars per acre with fire compared to hundreds of per acre whenever they're trying to address the wide woody infestation. That's one reason. Another big reason why we use fire now, we're starting to bring fire back, is that fire addresses all aspects of the encroachment process. Having that scheduled, rotational, prescribed fire is essential to keep that woody vegetation at bay.
In the Nebraska Sandhills, George and Barb Cooksley have used mechanical removal to clear cedar trees, and Barb has made it her mission to keep up the fight every day.
I don't go out in the pastures without my lopping shears and a collapsible handsaw. I've set a personal goal for the last 8 years of 1,000 trees that I personally get, and that does not include my grinder chipper or what the rest of the ranch crew has. Every vehicle at the ranch has this equipment in it, and it's so easy. It's like cutting thistle. You see it, you take care of it, and then you don't have to worry about it again.
As the Region 7 Vice President for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Barb also helped get NCBA policy passed, seeking support for the ongoing efforts to protect Great Plains grasslands.
So we did come up with national policy on addressing woody encroachment because it's important. We're the last intact grassland left. If we lose this, that impacts our grazing, that impacts our packing, that impacts our consumer down the road. So I think we can bring everyone in on this. Even our public now can recognize not just the beauty, but the importance of keeping it as a grassland. Because I think we've identified now that it's not a Sandhills issue, it's not a Luss Hills issue, it is a Great Plains issue. It does take all the partners we can find, federal level, the NGOs, our universities, our land grants, whatever we can do to work together. We need the science to say, okay, we'll get rid of them, but now how do we keep them out? That's where our partners at USDA can come in.
When Nebraska was being settled, it was thought more trees would be beneficial in improving the land. That's in part how the Nebraska National Forest, which was hand-planted starting in 1902, came to be. Today, in addition to NRCS, the U.S. Forest Service is also on the front lines of the woody encroachment issue in Nebraska.
I think that the Bessie Ranger District is uniquely positioned to implement this core strategy because we've got this oddity of a giant seed source right next to one of the most intact temperate grasslands in the world. And we have federal resources behind us to help try different things. I think we're well positioned to try different things without taking on some of the financial risks that a private rancher would have to do. What we're discovering is that in the Forest Service, we have good numbers in terms of what it takes to thin, to burn. When we contract to remove ultra low density cedars, so let's say 10 trees in a 500-acre pasture, it's $2 an acre. Let's say 20 years later, to burn it, it's $35 an acre. Wait another 20 years and you're looking at $200 to $400 an acre to thin and remove it, and it will come right back. So the new guidance focuses on keeping what you have, and it's much less expensive, much less labor intensive, and you're preserving something that has been shown to be this gem worldwide.
After we visited, a large wildfire claimed more than 5,000 acres of the Nebraska National Forest at Halsey, as well as more than 13,000 acres of privately owned lands and the life of a local firefighter. Researchers warn these large wildfires are a precursor for even more dangerous wildfires that could impact the Great Plains if volatile fuels like eastern red cedar continue to invade grasslands. It's clear protecting remaining grasslands is an issue that extends beyond state borders. That's why Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota are now joined together in the Great Plains Grasslands Initiative, or GPGI.
GPGI is the first time ever in Nebraska that we've really focused our energy on the grasslands of Nebraska through this initiative, and we are able to work with producers to address their resource concerns and implement conservation practices on their specific operations.
The Great Plains Grassland Initiative in Nebraska, we've adopted it through our EQIP program, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and that they've got 4 focal areas set aside in Nebraska where landowners are eligible to receive funding through the EQIP program to help offset things like brush management, cutting cedar trees, grazing deferment to prepare for prescribed burning itself. All those practices are eligible.
It's really amazing to see 4 states, with especially tied to NRCS, start to work together across those state lines and come under a common umbrella. I think for a lot of people, they wouldn't know how maybe surprising or unexpected or how unique that is. So this is one of the first times I've really seen for rangelands where you're seeing that approach needs to be expanded to take lessons learned from each state, collaborate across states. That's huge opportunities, because that means we're able to expand our scope and vision and really understand how to deal with this more broadly.
When we come back, we'll have more on how NRCS helps farmers and ranchers deal with invasive trees and brush. Stay with us.
Cattle producers across the country work hard to care for their animals and their land. The USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service is there to help. Find out how you can work with NRCS to develop a conservation plan for your operation. Find possible funding resources for implementing conservation practices, or get free expert advice on ways to improve your farm or ranch. Visit the website nrcs.usda.gov today.
At Merck Animal Health, we wake up each day seeking new innovations to keep your herd healthy. This is why we're proud to now include Allflex Livestock Intelligence in our portfolio of solutions. With Allflex, we can provide the tools to identify, monitor, and trace each animal within a herd. Its state-of-the-art offerings deliver real-time insights to help you optimize productivity. Merck Animal Health and Allflex Livestock Intelligence. For our animals, our industry, and our future.
Welcome back. The battle to protect and revive Great Plains grasslands is taking place across state lines. Farmers and ranchers are on those front lines as they graze their cattle and work to preserve the grasses that sustain their operations. So what steps can producers take to fight back, and where can they go for help in dealing with woody plant encroachment? One important ally is the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. NRCS offers farmers and ranchers the technical and financial assistance they need to protect and improve the resources in their care. Joining me now is Karen Woodrich, NRCS's Acting Deputy Chief for Programs. Karen, thanks for being here today. Can you tell us how NRCS programs and work on grassland conservation fits into USDA's focus and commitment to climate-smart agriculture?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Thanks for having me here today. Grasslands and conservation and climate-smart agriculture really go hand in hand. And with USDA's recent kind of resurgence and emphasis on climate-smart agriculture, it's great to see some of this in action as we're out here. We all know that grasslands are an important part of our economy. They're really important to the ranchers and farmers that are out here with the cattle on those grasslands. And sometimes I think we often forget that our grasslands, especially in the Great Plains, are 90% privately owned. And so our farmers and ranchers have this great opportunity to really impact carbon storage and carbon sequestration and what the grasslands bring to that whole climate-smart agriculture aspect. So we know that our grasslands not only have carbon storage above the surface, but really underneath, it's really an upside-down forest. And those roots grow deep, and they're digging for moisture, and they're really holding that carbon right there in the soil. And it's a great fit. It's a great way for our farmers and ranchers to realize the impacts of what they're doing to help the environment, to help save their bottom line, whether it's carbon, whether it's water resiliency and drought resiliency. Those grasslands really make a big impact.
So how is NRCS working to sort of direct the state's efforts in grassland conservation?
A lot of what we do is locally led, right? It's producer driven. And as far as the Great Plains Grasslands initiatives goes in the Great Plains here, this really was an effort locally from producers that have identified the need to come together as a community to save their grasslands, and also think about the economic viability. And when you think about it, grasslands really are the backbone of beef production and other meat productions across this country and actually worldwide. So in order for those folks to be able to improve their bottom line, to keep cattle growing, to keep even migratory birds happy, what's good for the herd is good for the bird as well, so it's also good for the pocketbook. So balancing that economic profitability and allowing those folks to really understand what's going on in their grassland community is really important. Within NRCS, we have what's called the Working Lands for Wildlife framework. And in and amongst that, we have the Great Plains Grasslands Initiative. And so we're working with those ranchers on preserving the grasslands that we have. Grasslands are being eliminated at an alarming rate, and we want to save what we can. There's only 4% of the original native prairie grasslands left. And so we're doing our best, and those ranchers are really doing their part to preserve those.
So why is it important for NRCS to partner with other folks like NCBA or other industry partners to implement these strategies through the Great Plains Grass Initiatives and something like Defend the Core?
It takes all of us, right? There's not one agency or one entity that can really provide all the resources that are needed, whether that's financial resources, technical assistance, those resources to know what trees to remove, how to identify some of those plant species, and then the labor force and the equipment that might be valuable to protect and to preserve some of those areas. And again, the Great Plains Grassland Initiative, kind of 3 tiers, defend the core, grow the core, and mitigate the risk on the edge of the core. And it takes all the partners talking about that and providing those resources to make that happen.
Karen, we certainly appreciate your time today. We really appreciate NRCS and all of the staff all across the country in those state offices doing that work and really helping out producers to really help the land. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you have conservation practices you'd like to put in place on your operation, you should start by visiting your local NRCS office and talk about the technical and financial assistance they provide. Go to their website, nrcs.usda.gov, to find an office near you. Joining me now is Sarah Sortum, a cattle producer from Schweitzer Ranch who also leads Cattlemen Outfitters, and Shelley Kelly, who is the Executive Director of the Sandhills Task Force. Thank you both for being with us here today. Sarah, you're playing host to us today on your beautiful ranch here in the Sandhills of Nebraska. Give us just a quick overview of your operation, please.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We're a multi-generational ranch here in the Sandhills on the eastern side of the Sandhills. My family has, my parents and my brother and his family and my family are all here on the ranch together making a living, and we're really proud of that fact. We've been here for over 100 years, but about 20 years ago we started a nature-based tourism business that also operates on the ranch.
And you also serve on the Tourism Commission here in Nebraska, is that correct? Tell us a little bit about that and what draws people to the Sandhills.
Yeah, it was a real honor to be appointed to the State Tourism Commission. Nebraska is a really varied state that people often don't recognize. But the Sandhills in particular are so unique on a global level. You know, to have this native intact grassland, increasingly rare ecosystem for people to experience, as well as the wildlife that call it home. So it is a real draw, and especially in these times when people want wide open spaces and a little bit of room, you know, to spread out, it's the perfect place to come visit.
And Shelley, speaking of those resources, the Sandhills are, I'm always blown away by the beauty of them, but they're very vast. They're really the largest intact grasslands really kind of left in the world. What work is being done to keep it that way, and why is it so important?
Honestly, ever since people settled the Sandhills, they've been doing work to keep the Sandhills intact. The only way you could make a living out here was to live off of the natural resources. Ranchers are the original conservationists, and so their livelihood truly depends on being able to manage the resources. To be able to keep the grassland intact, we need to graze, and to improve grazing management over time, we've seen the Sandhills go from an active blowing set of sand dunes to a very tight, closed canopy grassland that's very healthy and productive. Because of the grazing management and the work of the ranchers and the stewardship, we've been able to keep the native species intact and largely in the same composition that they should be in. The cedar trees are coming in and are causing some problems, but people are adapting to be able to take care of those cedar trees.
You mentioned the woody encroachment. Why is it such a threat? And then what's being done to sort of address the issue?
To be able to settle here, you had to plant trees. And so we've been planting trees. Nebraska is the home of Arbor Day. There's been such a campaign to plant trees that as you fly over the sandhills, you'll see the shelter belts all around. Calving, we need those. It's really important to have a little bit of a break from the wind now and again because it is a wide open prairie. However, if those windbreaks included cedar trees, those cedar trees are not staying in their neat little rows. They're now coming out into our pastures. And when you're planting a windbreak in a semi-arid environment, you want something that's drought tolerant, very hardy, grows fast, and is very bushy. If you have a tree growing out in your grassland and it's drought tolerant, very hardy, and very bushy, and the cows aren't going to eat it, it's not very helpful. And so we're seeing those trees come out of the windbreaks. We're seeing them come out of the rivers because of a lack of wildfire. We've reduced wildfire so much that now these fire intolerant trees are taking over our prairies. In my lifetime, I've seen the area from Sarah's place to my folks' place change dramatically, increase trees.
Sarah, you've dealt with red cedars here on your own property. What are you and other landowners doing to combat this invasive species, and why is it so important to keep the grasslands intact?
So there's lots of different approaches, and we do all of them, you know. If it's big trees that are too big to cut by hand, we'll use, you know, mechanical means to come in and get those trees cut down and pile them and burn those piles at a later date. If it's smaller trees, we still go out and try and do what we can by hand, especially in targeted areas, you know, high priority areas like next to a shelter belt or something like that where the seed source is most prevalent. On a more maintenance level, we do larger prescribed burns. And sometimes it's hard to make yourself light that match. But after you see what happens after the burn and how great the grass looks and how you can still utilize it for your grazing, cattle love it, they perform well on it. So if you can just make yourself do it, our results have been really good. And burning for us has been the most economical means to get on top of our cedar problem.
Well, again, thank you both so much for all the work that you're doing in this important issue. Thank you. We're back with some final thoughts on the importance of protecting grasslands right after this. Stay with us.
Get jazzed as the Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA Trade Show returns to New Orleans February 1st through 3rd, 2023. Experience the oldest and largest convention for the beef cattle business and a trade show like you've never seen before. Get up close and personal with the latest techniques and equipment on display. Invest in yourself and the beef cattle industry's future. Learn, network, and relax in the Big Easy February 1st through 3rd, 2023. Registered today by visiting convention.ncba.org.
Weeds will rob me of my investments. The weeds are not palatable to cows. They will not eat them, or if they do eat them, some of them may be toxic. So there's a return on investment by allowing there to be more grass available to be grazed by the cattle.
You have an upcoming production sale to advertise? Then contact the Cattlemen to Cattlemen marketing team or your breed association to learn more.
As we wrap up our show on the importance of protecting grasslands from woody plant encroachment, I'd like to ask Karen Woodrich and Dr. Twidwell to share some final thoughts on the topic. Karen, we've heard so much today about the challenges of woody encroachment. What would you like to leave our viewers with?
I think the most important thing I want to leave the viewers with is the fact that producer-driven, locally led conservation efforts are what really put things into action and on the ground. We've heard loud and clear, this is an important resource concern, this is an important issue for our producers, and working together locally, bringing all of the groups together, tying it to a national framework within the Working Lands for Wildlife effort, and addressing a landscape level initiative is really what's needed, and it's because all of that local work that's being done, remembering that the majority is privately owned grasslands, and that's where the action happens.
Dr. Twidwell, what would you add?
Well, I think we're just seeing for the first time, we've got the information, the desire of producers, obviously our legacy of rangelands are at threat, and it's to a biome threat of woody encroachment. So woody encroachment's now being elevated to the scale and discussion of it is not a local issue. It's not even a state issue. At this point, it affects our nation's grasslands, and it's that simple. And obviously prioritizing then, that is the most important thing. It is the leading threat that puts our rangelands at risk in the Great Plains. So that's number one at the top of the list if we're gonna sustain this long term. Our grazing improvements, water improvements, other infrastructure we do, all of that becomes at risk if you get your rangeland and that grazing land collapsing to woody encroachment. So a lot of people think of the risk of drought, right? But drought by definition is not permanent. So even in our worst drought we had recently in 2012 in Nebraska, there was approximately about a 50% reduction, and that was for 1 year. Woody encroachment, you're talking about long-term, 75% loss of production potential, and that's permanent, and it's been done in every state when we see this play out. So it's just such an important risk, and we just fail to act soon enough and prioritize the most important threat to our rangelands. It's key to make that number one, and then the other things start to follow.
Well, thank you both, first of all, for making us all aware of the problem, making us all aware of the importance of these grasslands, and most importantly, the work that you all do with others to make sure that these grasslands are preserved for the future. We thank you both very much.
Thank you.
If you have conservation practices you'd like to put in place on your operation, you should start by visiting with your local NRCS office about the technical and financial assistance they can provide. Go to their website, nrcs.usda.gov, to find an office near you. Well, that wraps up this edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. Thanks for spending time with us. We'll see you again next week right here on RFD TV.